Anton Swanepoel is the chairperson of the Financial Planning Executive Committee of the FIA. He is also a financial planner with more than 30 years' experience in the financial services industry. Anton has written more than 20 finance-related books and witnessed his fair share of our industry ups and downs. Anton will be speaking at the upcoming FIA Summit happening on 5 October, still virtually this year. And he will present his insights on risk profiling as a crucial component of suitability when advisors provide investment advice. The reality is that risk profiling has been a contentious issue in the financial services industry for many years. So Anton, great to connect.
Thank you, Rianet. As you know, it's always a pleasure to have some discussions with you. Thank you very much for the invite. Appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure. The purpose of our chat today is that you give us some background, a brief overview, and why the topic, so that we can entice people to go and listen to your talk. So we're not going to get your talk today, but some snippets so that we can make sure that we get the audience at the FIA Summit. So over to you, Anton.
Thank you very much, Rianet. I get very excited when I can speak about this topic because, as you quite rightly said at the outset, this has been a contentious issue for many, many years. Even when I joined the industry, people talked about a risk profile of a client. And interestingly enough, we have seen a lot of development in this area. A lot more research have been done. We have seen phase-onward determinations that address not only risk tolerance, but also risk capacity and required risk. We've seen this. So these days, if you ask any investment advisor, how would you describe the risk profile of a client? And how would you define risk in the investment space? If you ask 10 financial advisors without having had the privilege of using a sound basis for their reasons, you will get 10 different answers from that.
Unreal.
And that is why the FIA collaborated with the FPI to form a joint industry work group to investigate, and with its pure purpose of establishing a sound but simple foundation as the starting point of discussions in the rest of the industry. Because we cannot afford as a profession to have different interpretations when the code of conduct specifically requires that advisors do a risk profile. Therefore, if 10 different advisors interpret 10 different things around risk profiling, what is a risk profile? Not knowing that a risk profile is actually a combination of 3 very important concepts. The first is risk tolerance. Previously, a couple of years ago, maybe a decade or so ago, it was common practice for investment advisors to have a risk questionnaire completed by a client, asking 10 questions or whatever. And if the client says he's conservative based on those questionnaires, then the advisor would put that client into a conservative portfolio, and became the habit. But that is not an advice-led process. Therefore, we have to change the mindset of a component or a segment of the financial planning profession. You see, risk profiling is not just for the wealth advisors, those specialists who understand the fundamentals of investing. We must realize that we've got new entrants into the industry that don't know anything about investments. And depending on which supervisor that representative gets, You either get an investment specialist or you get a product smokes. And no consistency in the application of sound principles when it comes to risk profiling. Therefore, the FIA was instrumental in forming this work group. We worked with Professor Henko van Schalkwyk at the University of Pretoria. We have got Jacomine Versaghi, who's doing a doctorate on risk profiling. We've got Sulani Baloy at the FIA, who's doing a master's in risk profiling. As you may know, this is the third work group that I am part of on the topic of risk profiling. So we have, for the first time, officially taken hands between the FIA and the FPI to bring out a paper that we believe, after deliberating, we have had massive debates over the last year before publishing this paper. And we've included 4 former financial planners of the year from the FPI to participate in our discussions. So, Rianet, what we try to do in this paper, and that is what I'm going to discuss at the FIA Summit, is to bring out highlights. I'm going to elaborate on what we are talking about now at the summit, to highlight the importance that every single advisor who provides financial advice, and especially in the investment space, if you don't have a common understanding of the underlying components of risk profile, you are running a huge risk, not only from a complaints perspective, but you are risking giving poor advice to your client. We are moving, and the whole industry, the new term, the new buzzword is advice-led. And one of the primary examples of providing investment advice is where in the past you complete the form, and if the client believes he's conservative, and usually those forms are questionable. They're not credible. You know, every Tom, Dick, and Harry designs a risk tolerance questionnaire, and some of those questions, like the Ombud has highlighted, are not relevant to the specific client. So there are so many working parts, and that we needed to tie things up. Take the 20% of aspects around risk profiling and making sure that we get those principles right, which will affect 80% of quality advice going forward. So I must be honest, this is arguably one of the most important work groups that the investment planning profession has ever had in our country. And I was so privileged to be part of those discussions. I got to tell you that no one is as smart of us as all of us combined. This fantastic team effort to put a 46-page document together, where for the first time, the FIA, the FPI, and the financial planners of the year that participated agreed on the definition of risk for purposes of risk profiling. And those are some of the aspects that we're going to be talking about and unpacking. And I must tell you, if a planner at the FIA give investment advice, this is one of the foundational sessions that they should attend, because it's not because of the speaker. I am just going to share the key elements of that document that is going to change the way that professional investment advisors will give advice in the future. We agreed as a working group that we are 100% convinced that the definition of risk and the definition of risk profile, you can't refer to a risk profile in the code of conduct without having a definition for what it means. You see, the code of conduct doesn't define, or the FACE Act does not define risk profile for good reasons, because a risk profile maybe in investments looks different to a client's risk profile in long-term insurance. It's a totally different concept in short-term or non-life and the healthcare space. Therefore, we understand why the regulator did not define risk profile in itself. And it's left up to the profession to find collective answers for saying that if you are a member of the FIA or the FPI, you have to take cognizance of the content of this paper. So, Rianet, I think you can see that I'm quite passionate about this topic. And I'm going to close this insert by just encouraging financial advisors to attend this session, because on the back of that, there's also a CPD point if they read the paper and answer those questions on the portal. The FIA has applied for CPD approval. So not only will they receive one CPD point for the session, they will also receive 2 CPD points for reading the paper, which I think is profound, and then completing those questions. So there's a 3 CPD drawing card into this session, and I really hope that people make a huge effort to attend.
Yeah, I think that's a great drawing card. And at the same time, a fantastic way to make sure that the relevant people get the message. I think it's quite difficult to change old habits. What's the saying? Old habits don't die. So do you think it's going to be a challenge for many people to do things differently? I've been doing it the same way for many years, and for them, maybe it worked for their specific clients. They might not be one of the people who had an ombud complaint. So is it exciting enough, and how are we going to make sure that those that have these habits, and especially our older financial planners where change is quite challenging, how are we going to make sure, or is the change not that massive?
Rianet, great question. I think the change is, there is going to be a change required in some of the thinking. And one of the things that will force planners to change their old habits is that if there's one thing that can really grab their attention is face-on determinations. And some people have a false sense of security when it comes to client complaints. I have had some of the weirdest client complaints that put the advisor under so much unnecessary pressure that I don't believe that any investment advisor can afford to be ignorant on the development in this area of risk profiling. If any person with a 20, 30, 40-year history in our industry think that they can give advice the way that they've given it 30 years ago or 20 years ago in the investment space, I must warn them, because that is a false sense of security, and I think they will do themselves a disservice if they don't take these developments in the area of risk profiling seriously. There are 2 things, and I close with this on your question. The one is existing face-on determinations against advisors. Secondly, the General Code of Conduct was amended in June 2020, which made a profound difference in risk profiling. Risk profiling appeared in Section 81C of the General Code of Conduct since its inception in 2004. And now, in June last year, risk profiling was added to Section 81A, which places a bigger emphasis on what the regulator intends with risk profiling. So if there are changes in regulation and advisors continue to do what they did since 2004, there's going to be a big surprise for them. And unfortunately, In my discussions with financial advisors, they are quite rightly so involved in their businesses that sometimes they miss those subtle changes in the legislation. So I'm not judging them. I just want to encourage them to be mindful of the change in the General Code of Conduct, and that there's existing face ombud determinations which states that the ombud has got their magnifying glass on investment advice and specifically risk profiling.
Great. I think we'll get the audience we want. I'm definitely going to listen to your talk, Anton. I'm very excited to hear how this change is going to be. So from my side, besides listening to you, why should people register to attend the FIA Summit?
Well, I've got to tell you, the topics that we are addressing are relevant. And for us as financial advisors and intermediaries to stay relevant, we must be mindful of everything that is happening around us. So it actually gives every financial advisor and intermediary an opportunity to make sure that they're not getting left behind. It's the latest, it's updated information. This paper and this discussion, for example, was released in August. So now we have got this summit. So it's relevant. And if I may, Rianet, I just pay tribute to every person that actually you will see when you join. I will have pictures and photographs of all the participants. I mean, they have given up hours of deliberation, and they need to be recognized. You know, it's, sometimes the perception is that the person who talks about it is the main brain behind it. I can quite assure you that the things that I will be talking about is a collective effort. If ever there was a team effort, that paper and the topics that I will cover during our conversation. So they need all the credit for putting in hard work. And I just want to give a shout out to them as well.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer of teamwork makes the dream work. I experience that in my business a lot. So I agree with you 100%. Thank you, Anton, for your time. It's been fantastic to chat to you, and you definitely had my attention. I will definitely be listening to your talk at the FIA Summit on 5 October. Until we see each other in real life. Thanks for the chat.
Thank you, Rianet. All the best to you.